Hi, my name is Abby Linville, and today I'm going to be sharing with you about People First Language. In our school, we want to really promote an inclusive culture where all students are valued and celebrated. One of the essential things that we need to be able to do as professionals is to use People First Language. So today I'm going to share a little bit of information with you about it so that you can make a switch to using People First Language as well. So let's look at this number, 61 million. When you see this number, you think, wow, that is a large number. Well, according to the CDC, 61 million adults report having some form of disability. That's a large number. That equals out to about 1 in 4 adults. So that makes people with disabilities our nation's largest minority group. Not only is it the largest minority group, it is also the most diverse minority group. People with disabilities include people that are of all different ages, different genders, religion, races, and socioeconomic groups. So this is such a large minority group that I think it's time that we take a focus and really think about how we can make sure that people with disabilities feel valued in our school today. So we're going to learn a little bit more about People First Language and how that can support us in doing that. So first off, let's talk about what is People First Language. So it's a language that is used to appropriately and respectfully communicate with and about an individual with a disability. People First Language always emphasizes the person first and not their disability. It also is not just about being politically correct, it's about demonstrating respect for all people. So if you were using People First Language, you would say a person who has Down syndrome instead of saying he's a Down syndrome kid. The big major difference in that is that you are emphasizing the person first and not their disability. So why is this important? Well, it shows people with disabilities that you value and respect them as an individual. It also can change the way you see a person and the way that they see themselves. If you see a person as their disability, that can sometimes lower your expectations for them, and that's not fair. People with disabilities are also able to do many things that all of us can do with support. So when we lower our expectations, that is really unfair towards them, and we want to make sure that we expect the best from everybody and that the language you use supports that we have that viewpoint as well. Also, our attitude and language drives our actions. So the way we speak about someone not only drives our actions, but it also speaks volumes to those around us. And we want everyone to see that we are inclusive and that we respect all individuals. So let's look at some language that's currently being used. So some examples are, she is confined to a wheelchair. He's autistic. He is nonverbal. She's a sped kid. Those are all pieces of language that I have heard throughout our school over the years. So let's look at some different ways that we can change that language to be people first. So let's look at she is confined to a wheelchair. Instead of saying that, we could say a person who uses a wheelchair. We don't want to emphasize the disability. We want to always emphasize the ability that they have. And we always want to use a positive connotation. We don't want to ever speak negatively of someone. So if you said he is disabled, you are focusing on a negative, and you're also labeling that person and emphasizing what they cannot do. Saying a person with a disability, you're putting the person first, and you're also just saying that it is a disability, but you're not labeling them as something. That same thing would be true of saying he's autistic. You're then labeling them and putting the focus on the disability instead of the focus on the person themselves. So he has autism would be an example of People First Language. You also want to make sure that you avoid language that may be offensive to someone. So let's look at the last one that says, she is a nut. Sometimes people say something like that, or, oh, she's so crazy, and they're talking about someone who has a mental health impairment. Sometimes that can be extremely offensive to those people. So instead of saying something like that, you would say a person with an emotional disability or a person with a mental health disability. So you just want to make sure that you're using language that is respectful and not offensive. You also want to make sure that you emphasize a need for accessibility and not an actual disability. So let's look at the statement, that is the handicap spot. That type of language, the word handicap, is very outdated and is not respectful, and it's focusing again on the disability. Remember, we want to focus on accessibility, so the way that you could say that in people first language is to say accessible parking. And then the last one I really want to highlight is one that I hear often. I hear people often say, she's a sped kid, or he's a sped kid, or they're a sped kiddo. When you're using that, you are also, first, not talking about them as a person first. You are also labeling them. And it also carries kind of a negative connotation. And we want to speak of people positively. Remember, we're not defining a person. A person is not defined by their disability. So instead of saying she's a SPED kid, we would say that she receives special education services. So you're focusing on what the person needs and not labeling them instead. So let's look at some things that you will want to avoid as well. Sometimes, being very well-meaning, people will portray people with disabilities and say, oh, they're so inspirational. When you do that and you talk about, oh, they've overcome this and despite everything, they can do this. When you're saying that, you're saying they're inspirational purely because they have a disability. That is also carrying a negative connotation. It's not at all adding value to all the other great things that they are doing. So you want to make sure that you are saying things like, wow, she is a really successful person, or she is very productive, and that you are not using their label as a reason to say that they're inspirational. They're great no matter what. It doesn't mean it's not defined by their disability, whether or not they are successful or not. You also want to make sure that you avoid terms like normal people. When you refer to some people as normal people, what you're doing is telling people who have disabilities that they are not normal, which is not true and is very unfair. So if you are referring to, if instead of using normal people, you would say people without disabilities. Some other terms that you will want to avoid are terms like cripple, slow, jerk, or retard. All of those terms are very outdated and should not be used. They are often used as words to insult other people, and when we use words to insult other people like that, you are then sending a message to people with disabilities that that is how you feel about them as well, which can be extremely hurtful to them. You also want to make sure that you use the term has and not suffers from. Suffers from carries a negative connotation, and remember, we want to see people in a positive light and we want to treat them respectfully, so we do not want to use terms like suffers from that would make them see themselves negatively. I also want you to take a look at this pledge. It's a People First Language Pledge, and what it does is it makes you aware of what People First Language is and encourages you to make a switch to using it because it's what's best for all students in our school and all people in general. You want to make sure that you are using language that is respectful and supportive of people with disabilities, and making this pledge shows that you are ready to make a commitment to changing your language to support all of our students. I also want to leave you with this quote from Kathy Snow, who is a parent of a student with disabilities and also an advocate for people with disabilities. And her quote is, "A person with a disability is more like people without disabilities than different. Everyone is valuable and everyone brings something unique to the table, and we should be celebrating these differences and supporting one another. So I ask of you to really think hard about the language you're using and make a switch to people first language so that we can create a culture that is inclusive and accepts all and really celebrates everyone in our school. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great day.